EVO.
Pie in the Sky Media. This series contains adult language and descriptions of graphic violence throughout. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Criminal Mischief with Carolyn and Brandon. You're listening to episode 167, a special update on the infamous torso killer, Richard Cottingham. So we first covered the crimes of Richard Cottingham in episode 5 of Criminal Mischief. This was way back in October of 2022, so it's been a minute. If you don't remember the case or if you want a refresher, just scroll way down to the beginning of our feed and give a listen. But I'm also going to give you a quick rundown. So Richard Cottingham was convicted of 5 murders back in the early 1980s, and he's been in prison since then. But he was always suspected of many more murders across New York and New Jersey, even though he proclaimed his innocence for decades. That is until he started talking about his crimes in 2010, which opened the door to a series of confessions. And he claimed responsibility for as many as 80 to 100 victims between 1963 and 1980. For a long time, investigators believed that he targeted young women who were sex workers. But over time in his confessions, they realized that he was targeting students and also suburban mothers, and that his MO varied, but included dismemberment. He was known for drugging and restraining his victims, often with handcuffs. He gagged them, and he tortured them, and in some cases set his crime scenes on fire. In 2021, he admitted to drowning 17-year-old Marianne Pryor and 16-year-old Lorraine Kelly in a motel bathtub. In 2022, he pleaded guilty to the 1968 murder of Diane Cusick and confessed to 4 other murders in Long Island in the early 1970s as part of a larger plea deal. These confessions and how they came about is something we discussed in episode 15 of Criminal Mischief with author and investigative historian Dr. Peter Vronsky in January of 2023. It's here that Dr. Vronsky explained his unlikely partnership with Jennifer Weiss. Jennifer's mother was murdered by Cottingham. Even so, she and Dr. Vronsky came together as a team of confidants whose sole purpose was to establish rapport with Cottingham to get him to confess to more murders. One of the many unsolved cases Jennifer was convinced Cottingham was responsible for was the murder of Alice Eberhardt back in September of 1965. In 2021, Fairlawn detectives began interviewing Cottingham about Alice's murder. It was at this time that they also started working with Dr. Vronsky and Jennifer Weiss, who helped facilitate communication between these detectives and Cottingham. Tragically, Jennifer passed away in 2023. Now, we're revisiting this case again because just last week, the Fairlawn Police Department announced that Cottingham officially confessed to the murder of Alice Eberhardt. Alice was just 18 years old when she was stabbed and bludgeoned to death at her family's home by Richard Cottingham. Here's my conversation with Dr. Peter Vronsky, who gives us a play-by-play about how this latest confession came about and about the behind-the-scene politics of a serial killer who wants to confess, but time is running out because Cottingham is in poor health. But as Dr. Peter Vronsky shares, will all these jurisdictions put their egos aside and get answers for family members before it's too late?
Okay, so yes.
I've been up since November 1st when Cottingham returned from hospital. He nearly died in October. And of course, our fear is that he was going to die and take all these cases with him to the grave, that there would be no solution. And so the moment he got back from hospital, a number of cops who have Cottingham cases on their desks, but have been, some of the cops, some of the jurisdictions have been very lazy about going down to interview him. Just go see him, ask the guy, right? Others were not. And so the ones that were not, like a herd, arrived at his hospital bed in the prison when he was brought back. There was actually, literally, at one point there was a lineup. Guys were waiting for the other guys inside to finish because they didn't know. You see, they don't know each other. They're all working independently of each other. Cops still, to this day, do not talk to each other. It's unbelievable. You know, this is like Ted Bundy years when cops were not sharing information. Many still do not. Some do, many still do not.
Okay, wait a second. Before we get to the herd, because it's such a visualization that I can see that, but aren't you, your partner who passed away, Jennifer, you know, you were the ones that were connecting these agencies together, or at least trying to, right? So why don't you talk a little bit about, we got this herd at the hospital and you're sounding the alarm of like, hey, this guy's about ready to die. Let's talk about what you did.
What I did exactly in this case is the one police department that was waiting the longest, the one that Cottingham felt was the underdog, because Cottingham psychologically loves the underdog. Jennifer was an underdog for him because she was so disrespected by so many police departments, like a kooky housewife. Cottingham was, you know, I'm out there for her. I'll confess for her. She's no kooky housewife. She's right. I killed those girls, and I'm going to restore her dignity. All right?
Okay,
you know, I killed her mother. I owe her that.
Okay, what was that like? Because that's, you know, the psychology of these cold cases and these serial killers. Like, it's like
nothing ever that I can look to in the past history of cold case closures and say, well, it's like this, and this is, you know, how we should handle this because that's how it was handled. You know, there's no precedent to this. There's no precedent to this. And so,
what replaced that after she passed away tragically? Was it like 2 years ago?
She passed away in May of 2023.
Okay.
And by then, Fairlawn had problems with BCPO because they're a small town department. BCPO are the big boys on the block. Though they consider small police departments, independent departments, as a bunch of rubes. You guys are like Andy Mayberry, you know. What do you guys know? We're the experts here.
And what does BCPO stand for? Bergen County
Bergen County Prosecutor's Office.
Oh, okay.
They're the highest law enforcement authority in Bergen County. So they have their own detectives. And their detectives, technically, work with smaller town detectives. They jointly investigate and prepare a case. But the reality is because BCPO detectives have the prosecutor behind them, if a case is going to be prosecuted or pursued is up to often the detectives and the chief of police, the chief of detectives in BCPO. And so Rob Angelotti, who was chief of detectives on all the Cottingham cold case closures there, he ran a very tight shift, and Cottingham was confessing to him. So other police departments really didn't have much say about challenging, you know, BCPO about how Cottingham was handled because Rob was doing the job. He was closing cases. Now, the moment Rob Angelotti retired in April 2021, Detective Elsevich from Fairlawn PD goes down to see Cottingham now. Now that Chief of Detectives is out of the way, and the new Chief of Detectives doesn't know his rear end from the hole in the ground. Right? Everything is stalled. So now he goes in. He goes in and he interviews Cottingham in 2021, around May, And the moment he comes back, he's told by BCPO to never, ever go back to interview Cottingham without one of their detectives with him.
And how did that sit with him?
Well, he said, oh, okay, understood. When can we go back with one of your detectives? And he's ghosted. He's ghosted all of 2021. He's ghosted all of 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025. BCPO is not responding to him. Mm-hmm. The only thing BCPO tells him is you have to go back with one of our detectives, and you have to go back with Rick Kurt, who is now the head of New Jersey State Police Cold Case Unit. The problem with BCPO and their investigation is that one of the detectives on the cold case squad, who I knew very well and who Cottingham really liked, was arrested for dealing fentanyl out of the evidence locker and is now facing something like 22-count indictment.
Whoa.
So the entire cold case unit at BCPO is disbanded because now they're all suspect. So that doesn't help. Mm-hmm. Okay? And so they continue to ghost Fairlawn, and Fairlawn now said, we're just going to close this for the family. We can't risk Cottingham dying. So Fairlawn had gotten in touch with Jennifer in 2022 and asked her, you talked to Cottingham. What's your take on it? And can you talk to Cottingham? And
now,
they did the same
Peter,
with
let
me.
let me ask you a question. Is this they're trying to solve the cold case of Alice Eberhardt?
Yes.
Okay, so
Carolyn is Alice Eberhardt.
And they knew that was the case
2 days ago.
Right, and they knew that was the case that they believed Cottingham was responsible for that. So that's what they were doing.
Jennifer had to convince me. She was acting on intuition. I was trying to act on evidence. Mm-hmm. And until 2022, I had no evidence that Cottingham ever fractured any of his victims' skulls. I had no evidence that Cottingham ever entered into a home to kill a victim. But as cases were beginning to get closed in 2022, I started seeing on the case files that there were now victims with fractured skulls, and there were now victims who were murdered in their own homes. And on top of that, the newspaper, remember, I usually don't have access to open cases. Mm-hmm. My information is coming from newspapers. And all the newspapers, the third element that made me doubt Cottingham, all the newspapers reported that Alice Eberhardt was stabbed 62 times, and I never saw Cottingham stab his victims in that crazy, 62 times or 10 times or 20 times. In June last summer, Fairlawn PD opened the files to me, and I saw the crime scene photos. There were no 62 stabs. The newspapers totally misled, maybe deliberately, maybe they didn't know better, but there were 62 shallow scratch marks, like shallow cuts. And when I saw that, I nearly fell out of my chair, because I've seen that on numerous Cottingham cases. So those three things convinced me by last summer, oh yeah, Jennifer was right after all. Cottingham did do this.
What did you think about that realization with Jennifer? I know how close you were. I mean, I don't know, but I can imagine how close you were to her. What did you think about that realization, knowing that Jennifer had passed and that she was right? And that she has been.
Well, it just put the fire under me and under Fairlawn to get this done. By then, Fairlawn, they never came back, but they were shooting Cottingham questions through me, and I was getting back to them. And Cottingham was aware of this. Cottingham wanted to confess to this. Fairlawn felt that they were obligated to BCPO not to do this, not to go see him again, the way they were ordered not to. And so they're continuing to do their interviews, but through me now. So I'm giving them back what Cottingham is saying, and we're not getting into the details of the case, but we're at issue in the questions going back and forth between Fairlawn and Cottingham is, does he have anything to say? And he does. And he lets them know he does. And so now he nearly dies. He comes back out of the hospital, and he is being ignored personally by Rick Kurt of the New Jersey State Police. He's being ghosted by him. And Rick Kurt sends him one message promising that he's going to come back in November, and if not in the last week of November, in the first week of December, and that he's bringing Fairlawn with him. So that settles that for Rich. He's waiting, ready to do the confession to New Jersey State Police and Fairlawn together, and presumably there'll be a detective from BCPO, except Lieutenant Kurt says nothing to Fairlawn PD about the coming interview that he promised he's going to do with Rich. And so the interview was going to be on the Monday. I'm waiting to hear from Fairlawn PD. Did you hear from Rick? Did you hear from Rick? Friday night. They're supposed to be there Monday morning. Nothing. So Rick doesn't show up. He doesn't send Cottingham a courtesy the way other cops do, because stuff comes up for cops, and Cottingham knows that. He doesn't send Cottingham any message like, sorry I didn't make it, but I'll be back next week, but sorry I didn't make it. Nothing. So we wait another week, because he said maybe the Monday after that. Again, Friday, no notice from the Fairlawn cop. He's sitting there, nothing. Monday morning, Rick doesn't show up again. This is so important that these detectives at Fairlawn PD had the support of their chief. That can happen in a smaller police department where you have policemen in charge, not politicians, or career, bureau billies. So the chief said, go, I'll back you guys up. Go see him. So they go, and they have the first interview since 2021 with Cottingham, and he tells them a lot. And the moment Lieutenant Kurt gets wind of it, he doesn't message Cottingham. He complains to the Fairlawn cops, how dare they go see Cottingham without him, and files a complaint with BCPO, or I should say, tells them that he's filing a complaint with BCPO, which I'm sure he did. That's the only time we heard from Rick Kurt to basically obstruct that case. And so the Fairlawn cops basically said, and went to see him.
What is that? You're giving like the chin. What is that called again? I know it's like the middle finger, but like.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Okay. Okay.
So they went to see him, and December 22nd, late at night, Cottingham told them everything he could remember. Very little of it was in the newspapers. He described the layout of the house. He described the swimming pool. He described what was inside the swimming pool. He described where he had encountered Alice Eberhardt, from where, how he got into her house. He described everything. Sufficient for them and for me now that I've heard the confession, to be persuaded, oh yeah, this was Cottingham, despite my own doubts. And Jennifer, she was right. Her intuition was right. She had really no technical evidence for it, and everything on the record pointed, it didn't exclude Cottingham, but it pointed away from him. It wasn't like him, this one. But as I said, after 2022, with more confessions from Cottingham, this case and many others now, you see, every time he makes a confession, I've now started going back over the ones that I thought, this is in his geography, but, it's not really. I don't see him doing this anywhere else. Now, he's pretty much done everything everywhere else except for two things I've so far have not been able to confirm, and that's a manual strangulation with his own hands. And I don't think he ever did that for forensic reasons. He knew that he could leave his prints even in a manual strangulation. There's a risk, right? Especially if his hands are bloody. And secondly, he did indeed, enter into victims' homes. We now have 2 confirmed cases like that. We didn't in 2021. So every time he confesses, something new comes up. Those other cases that I have on my website, I renew them now and upgrade them in their suspectability as we go along.
Okay, so people can go to your website and it has all of the suspected victims. What is your website again?
Yes, the website is nynjpd.org.
Okay. So,
and there's also richardcottingham.com.
Okay. So, Peter, as you're going through this incredible case that you've worked on, how many years have you been working on this?
8 years.
8 years. It feels like you're down, there's a lot of like bureaucracy and infighting and like just really, has it questioned your feelings of humanity and why people do what they do? It's not only just Richard Cottingham and what he did, but then also like the jockeying and the politics and the bureaucracy and like you have some. I know you're putting your head up on your hand, and
it ain't Law and Order like on TV. I'll tell you that much. They are only interested in their own bottom lines, their own budget appropriations. They will walk over other cops in other jurisdictions, even in their own jurisdiction, to get credit for these cases, because come budget time and budget appropriations, this looks good for them. And that's why my website exists, because, for example, BCPO and New York City, NYPD are notorious for hating each other and not talking to each other since the 1920s.
And it's
during
still
Prohibition, when cops in Bergen County and cops in New York City got into a war over shares and bribes for smuggling liquor over the river. Now, all that bribe money was invested into benevolent police associations and is still yielding interest today. And the cops in those 2 jurisdictions, it's like the Hatfield and McCoys, or like Bosnia in Yugoslavia, old hatreds from their grandfather days. They all forgot what the hatred was about in the first place, but they still won't talk to each other. So I set up that website because New York would talk to me and say, tell Bergen County, and I would go to Bergen County and say, NYPD says, and they say, well, you go tell NYPD. Well, why don't you guys just call each other? Here, I'll give you the numbers. Oh, no, we don't, so I set up that website so they can look at each other's cases without the indignity of having to telephone each other and talk to each other.
Now, I know that you're not trying to, I don't want you to toot your own horn or set that up, but a person like you and Jennifer, you guys are really important in this case, where you're the go-between with these 2 factions, plus the family members, plus the biggest thing I think is establishing that relationship with Richard Cottingham, that trust. Do you
Police hate outsiders? We're outsiders. We'll always will be outsiders, and I still am to this day. I understand that. I'm not in the brotherhood, sisterhood of the Blue Wall. I understand that. And even cops that work with me and like me, but I always have that relationship as an outsider. I'm a consultant at best. I'm an outsider, and I absolutely understand that. Imagine There are so many people who come to the police with information and leads and want to be involved. And so I understand their reluctance, aside from the issue of credit and pride, but administratively in police work, I understand that they have a very, very strict procedure. It's about collecting evidence. It's about collecting usable evidence. And the role of outsiders, first of all, it disrupts the chain of custody on some things. So it's entirely understandable how, we as outsiders are looked at with, I don't want to say, with anxiety. And Jennifer, I'm sorry, but Jennifer earned that nickname that Cottingham gave her. Hurricane Jennifer. She, there are times, I quarreled with Jennifer a lot, right? We were like a loving couple, constantly quarreling. She was much younger, of course, than me. She had that young person, she was in her 40s, but I'm going to be 70 soon, so 40 is like, young. So I have that extra, 30 years of your time perception shifts. And so if cops tell you wait a month or 5 months or a year, which is the way they work, right? It takes years on these cases. As a guy in his 60s, that time just went by really quick. For Jennifer, it was like, oh my God, my hair is going to go gray by the time they're done, and so she sometimes, really pushed. That's the wonderful thing about, Jennifer.
And that's, I guess, the underdog. I think that's really interesting that he saw her. And I don't want to elevate. This guy's a serial killer. So
Cottingham loved Jennifer, deeply loved her, because she forgave him. Not only forgave him for killing her mother, but she embraced him. And every time he made a confession, Jennifer just hugged him and embraced them with her love
From
and
Pie in the Sky
forgiveness
Media,
and
Criminal
encouraged him,
Mischief
let's
is
do
an
another
EVO
one.
production,
Let's
recorded
go,
live
Rich.
in the beautiful
You're
Pacific
doing the right
Northwest.
thing. You're
We're
bringing
produced by
peace
Brandon
to
Morgan
all
and
the
myself.
families.
Music
You're
by
so
Soundstripe.
good. You're such
For
a
EVO
good man.
Creative, I'm Carolyn
Despite all the
Osorio,
things
your
you
writer
did,
and host.
You're trying to be a good man to your death, and you can't bring those victims back to life, but you can change the lives of the victim families who are suffering right now. You can end their suffering.
and is that what keeps you going for yourself and for Jennifer's memory?
That's what keeps him going. That's what keeps him going. That's what keeps him confessing. And that's why Fairlawn, even though Jennifer passed away in 2023, Fairlawn felt obligated to thank Jennifer for everything that she had put in. And when Cottingham was making that confession on December 22nd, the spirit of Jennifer was sitting next to him, pushing him onwards.
I love that. That's so amazing. I mean, there's so many layers to this story. I know that they've done a Netflix series with you on it, The Torso Killer. I mean, do you imagine doing something more, like more of a personal story about you and Jennifer? Or I don't know if you can talk about that.
Well, I have hours and hours of footage of Jennifer with Cottingham. That's all there. Since the Netflix show, Cottingham had confessed, I think, to another 9 murders.
Wow.
Since that day the show aired. There's also Chief Angelotti's series on A&E, The Torso Killer Confessions, in which he describes how those cases in New Jersey were closed. But nothing has been done since five case closures in Nassau County, 1 case closure in Rockland County, 1 more case closure in New York City, and this one now. So I've assisted in 11 cases. None of those 11, 2 were already closed when Jennifer and I went on air, but the other 9 were still in progress when Jennifer and I did that show with Joe Berlinger.
How many cases do you think he's good for in that herd of investigators that were at his hospital,
Well,
hospital waiting? Like, how many do you think he is suspected for in how many different jurisdictions or
I am
towns?
urgently pushing 9 cases.
Okay.
8 cases now, because Amber Heard is one of the 9, in which in 2 of those cases, and I'll send you the graphic when we're finished, in 2 of those cases, Cottingham has already contacted the family and apologized to the family for killing their loved one, and the district attorneys refuse to this day to send any police officers to interview him. 3 cases. Refuse to send detectives to interview him about his apology to the families for murdering the loved ones.
Why?
Yes, exactly. Because why? Because everybody wants a DNA instant swab case solution. They're lazy and they don't want to spend the money to send detectives to develop a rapport with Cottingham, like the way Fairlawn did. Fairlawn developed a rapport and did old school, old-fashioned police work. They interviewed the suspect. Everybody else now, it's like the flavor of the month. It's like artificial intelligence police investigation. We're going to go in there, swab him for a minute, case solved. Mm-hmm. And if they don't get a positive result from a swab, they're not going to invest the time and the money and the overtime and travel budget for police detectives to go see Cottingham in prison and bring peace to the families. It's not worth it for them when they can just keep swabbing other cases. And Cottingham killed before there was DNA. So we have one DNA case that DNA, by a miracle, had survived. By a miracle.
So if I'm reading between the lines here, I recall in our previous interview where you spent a lot of time, part of getting him to confess was establishing that rapport, talking about pastrami sandwiches on, in Broadway or really putting in the time. And he still kind of requires that, right? He's not going to just, these police officers come in and he's just going to spill. He wants to have that kind of...
No, he's a serial killer. He needs to control the scenario. He needs, he's a serial killer. You got to deal with him as you deal with any serial killer. He sets up his own rules. He will be true to every promise he makes. He is very, very... Once Cottingham promises, but he expects law enforcement to hold to their promise as well, the way Detective Angelotti did, the way previous detectives have, and all that emerges in that report, because Cottingham needs to psychologically feel that he's in control of making the confession. And my argument is, who cares what he feels like? Let him feel that he's in control. Help the families.
Mm-hmm. What is your relationship with Cottingham now?
My relationship?
Mm-hmm.
I'm described as his confidant, and I think that's a good description. I know what every other police department is doing. With him, through him, we talk daily on the phone, and he's the daily part of my life. Every day I have a call from one of the more notorious serial killers in American history. He's now down for 20 murders, which is how many Ted Bundy was officially connected to. So he's reached Ted Bundy scale now. And oddly enough, he was born only 18 hours after Ted Bundy was born. And look at the fame that Ted Bundy has in terms of being recognized as the seminal serial killer, and people have hardly heard of Cottingham. It's very ironic and paradoxical, but it has to do with Cottingham being a hermit for 30 years. The moment he was convicted at his last trial in 1984, he disappeared into the prison system. did no interviews, sent no letters, talked to nobody, all right, lived in prison, and it wasn't until 2009 when journalist Nadia Pizzani convinced him to do an interview for French television on the condition that it would not be broadcast in English in North America. And in that interview, he told Nadia that indeed the 5 women that he was convicted for killing, he did kill them after all, even though he pled not guilty. He did kill them. That he knew Jennifer's mother, Dida Godarzi, and that he cut her head off and her hands so that people would not connect her to him. He had a casual friendship with her. And that he had killed between 85 and 100 women prior to his arrest. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. End of quote. And everybody laughed at Nadia. I said, yeah, you're a little French journalist from, she's from Canada. You're a little French-Canadian journalist. What do you know? He's bullshitting you. And then 2010, he confesses to the 6th murder. And it's from 1967. Suddenly we add 10 years to his killing career because the 5 previous were from 77 until 1980. Now we go back to 67. And if you take 67 to 1980 divided by 100, that's one murder maybe every 7 weeks. Mm-hmm. Entirely doable before you have DNA, before you have cell phones, before you have ubiquitous video surveillance, before everybody is using a credit card, before the FBI mine hunters are profiling. When Cottingham was arrested in 1980, the mine hunters, Robert Resler and John Douglas, are still interviewing those serial killers in prison. Mm-hmm. And the word serial killer is not even being used in the media or in popular culture. New York Times uses the word serial killer in 1981. Cottingham's already 18 months under arrest when the word begins to appear in the New York Times, serial murderer, serial killer. And so without the word, you don't have the concept. And so it's absolutely plausible, and especially when I look back in the newspapers on all those cases, nobody, you have 3 teenage schoolgirls strangled in Bergen County in 1968 and 1969, and nobody is asking, is this the same perpetrator? It's inconceivable. Serial killers, there's no word for it. There's no concept.
Are those cases still unsolved, or were those the ones that were solved where he killed 2?
Those were solved, yes. Those were solved. But when they weren't solved, Cottingham didn't get confessions from Cottingham to those until 2014 to 2017.
What do you think of, talking about serial killers, I can't remember the name of the book, but there's a book that came out about saying, like, the serial killers, like, from the 70s and 80s, a majority of them, if not all, lived near a smelter or, like, an iron ore, like Ted Bundy and so many others. Have you looked into that, or what are your thoughts on that?
What was the first part about that theory?
The theory is that these serial killers in the 70s and 80s who grew up, or the 60s and 70s, they lived near smelters, iron ores, like Ted Bundy. He lived in Tacoma, and there was, that there's a pattern that these serial killers lived near these smelters, and that could be an explanation for...
You're talking about the lead poison?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. I suspect that's not the case, but really, honestly, I haven't looked deeply into that theory. It's a possibility, because I know during the Roman Empire there were problems 2,000 years ago when they used lead to make house plates that people ate off.
Oh,
right. So lead exposure. It's an interesting theory, and I don't want to exclude it. But they're everywhere. I have other theories. My theory is post-war, post-Second World War trauma in the fathers bringing up those children, and basically a kind of an American noir culture that emerges in the 1950s following the war, including what the FBI says about detective magazines, the portrayal of this kind of blatant rape culture and rape and torture culture that is celebrated in these magazine covers. Mm-hmm. Pulp men adventure stories that always involve imagery of battered, semi-nude women that are ubiquitously available everywhere. I mean, I remember as a kid seeing those covers, right? And I had a particularly punishing grade 3 teacher, and I remember as a kid looking at those pictures. I would have been like 7 years old, and my mom would take me to the supermarket, and there was a magazine supermarket, and, you know, I was bored walking around with her in the market. She says, well, go look at the magazines, right? Not realizing what was being sold in the supermarkets, and I'd be looking at those pictures of women bound and tortured, and I'd be fantasizing, boy, would I like to do that to Mrs. Smith in my class, you know, my teacher. Right now, imagine if I was like a heavily abused boy, and I had something else wrong, and you know, it's never one thing; it's a combination of things. What kind of impact and what kind of fantasies those images, you know, did? I mean, I had feelings. I had serial killer-like feelings toward my school teacher for punishing me.
Well,
So,
it's interesting because I remember,
imagine.
yeah, Ted Bundy had kind of talked about that too, and it was right before he was about ready to be executed, and so it was kind of discounted or dismissed, at least from when I listened to it.
Oh,
of like,
the FBI called it pornography for serial killers. There's an academic forensic article and study on how many serial killers thrived on those magazines. You look at those Ed Gein photographs from his house. He's got piles of those magazines. You see them in those pictures, right?
Yeah.
The True Detectives and the Pope Adventure. You know, I wrote about those things in great detail about those magazines in my book, The Sons of Cain, and in American Serial Killers. That whole idea that we have this incredible surge, right, in the 1970s and 1980s into the 1990s of serial killers, and I partly attribute that, you know, because serial killers, the average age that they commit their first murder is around 27, 28. And so when you look at Ted Bundy when he's 27, 28, right, people, and myself included in the early days in my first books, I associated that with the times in which he was living. The Vietnam War, just the Kennedy assassination, the riots, the general disruption of culture in the United States in the 1960s, the sexual revolution, all that. But you got to back it up, you know, because according to forensic psychiatric literature, these guys who kill at 27, 28 are already fantasizing about it when they're as young as 5 years old. Mm-hmm. So you got to back it up and look who their fathers were when they were 5 years old and 10 years old, and what was the culture they were living in. And that takes you back to the post-war years and into the 1950s, early 1960s, when these adult serial killers were little boys, and there were a whole lot of other bad things happening to them, whether they were head injuries or familial abuse or, you know, other things, and that adds just another taste in the cocktail that eventually emerges when that boy becomes a man, and by 27, 28, they act for the first time. Mm-hmm. On average, statistically.
And I'm sure there are precipitating events. You know, we saw that with when I did my deep dive into the Green River Killer, where, you know, he was in high school when he lured a little boy into the woods and stabbed him. That was completely against his future MO, but he was practicing. So like
You're talking about whom?
I'm talking about the Gary Ridgway. Gary
Yes,
Ridgway,
yes.
the Green River Killer. Yeah. So
They don't have MO. Their MO is always changing. And that's one of the pushbacks I get on Cottingham often. Oh, this isn't his MO. They don't do their homework. They don't look at other jurisdictions. Oh, this is not his MO. He only killed sex workers. Excuse me. Why don't you just take a look at the 20 murders now and the statistics on who the victims were? Only 30% were sex workers. The other 70% were schoolgirls, housewives, working women. So that he only killed, he only killed sex workers is so old, yet they don't do their homework. That's the first conversation I often have with them, is I have to point out to them, hey, take a look. He stabbed them. He suffocated them. He drowned them. He ligature strangled them. And he battered them to death so far. Right? But in the 1960s, if you stabbed one victim, but the other victim was strangled, that's not his MO. That's how they thought back then. And some cops, I don't know how they are assigned cold case detectives, still to this day say that kind of thing. Some do, some don't. But that's the problem also with the American law enforcement system. It's breaking down into these tiny little principalities, like Italy before the unification. You have these city-states, counties. One county is amazingly efficient and clever and smart and dedicated. The next county over is the opposite. Take the difference between Nassau County, New York, which closed 5 Cottingham cases, and Suffolk County, New York, Gilgo Beach country, where they're refusing to do anything about the cases Cottingham did there. And they're still refusing to this day. And now they're just blowing up victim family and stuff. Oh, we're on it, right? I know they're not on it because I'm talking to them, right? They're not, they did one thing. They collected a handprint from Cottingham 3 months ago after he got out of the hospital. That's the only thing they did it.
Okay, well, you know what? Hurricane Jennifer, but I'm feeling like there's a Hurricane Peter with your passion, and you're still at it. 8 years in, what is next for you with this?
Yeah, next for me, I don't know. Honestly, I have all these cases. Next for me is there's a case right now that's on the way. Cops are briefed. They're on side. They want to do this, and Cottingham was just 2 days ago taken away in emergency to hospital. 3rd time now, in critical condition in the last 4 months. And my fear, of course, is that he's not going to come back, that he's going to die. And these cops are right now standing by, waiting for him to be returned, so now they can go in and do their thing with Cottingham on the case that I was made persona non grata for advancing, and then that cop retired, and new cops came online, and now I'm persona grata again. So I'm the new Jennifer now. I'm the wacky housewife that is nagging everybody. I'm the only one left.
I absolutely love that. Because, I can't think of a more fitting tribute to your partner in crime than for you to be Hurricane Peter in her honor. And I just love that. And I think that it's amazing the work that you've done and you continue to do.
Thank you.
And
I'm going to keep trying to go at this. I'm not even thinking about the book anymore. It's like, the book is written, but there's no ending. So until I have the ending chapter, and I'm afraid it will be, I'm not sure if I can walk away from this until Cottingham walks away. So when Cottingham passes on, and he could have passed on in the hospital today. I don't know. So as long as I can do what I managed to get done here in Fairlawn for Alice Eberhard, and if I can do it for the other 8 victims on that matrix I have of the 9 most urgent. There's another 20 I'm aware of. But these 9 are the ones that Cottingham has, like I said, in some of them reached out to family and has already confessed to family. Right? So those 9 I've made a priority out of the 20 that I know he's good for, but it would be starting up again. But these 9 he's willing to talk about. He reached out to family on some of the cases. So and they're now 8. So 1 off the matrix now of the 9.
That's incredible. Well, thank you so much. And send me that matrix. And
yes, I will. I'll send you the link for all the handouts. Maybe you can use them as graphics in your show.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thank you so much, Peter.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
So before I let you go, I just want to acknowledge all of the hard work, obviously, of Dr. Peter Vronsky, but especially the work of Jennifer Weiss, Hurricane Jennifer. Because without her, many of these confessions would have never happened. Up next, Criminal Mischief bonus content. Here, my co-host, Brandon Morgan, and I discuss the case in more detail. And as always, thanks for listening. From Pie in the Sky Media, Criminal Mischief is an EVO production, recorded live in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. We're produced by Brandon Morgan and myself, music by Soundstripe. For EVO Creative, I'm Carolyn Osorio, your writer and host.